Welcome back to the podcast. Gabe, Giannis, and I, we are joined by Nathan Mansfield. Nathan, he comes to us with a lot of experience. He spent 13 years in special forces. He's the founder of Crucible. He's a husband. He's a father of 3 boys, which is always interesting to talk to guys with that background. But I got a lot out of this episode. I think that he shined light, in particular towards the end, in just some like really profound concepts that I'm going to take and impart into my life. And I can't wait for you guys to hear more about it.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely one that I'm going to probably re-listen to. Like, I'm still kind of like trying to process a lot of what we talked about, a lot of what he shared. I think his story of how he kind of like found faith and came full circle to the mentorship he's doing now was crazy. You know, this is one of our episodes in the Shoulder to Shoulder month to bring awareness to men's mental health. And, you know, the fact that I don't want to spoil anything, but the fact that, you know, his story of how he got to where he got to was a near suicide. I think it was really inspirational. I appreciate him sharing. And I think there's a lot of takeaways and a lot of inspiration you can get from this episode. I know I took away from it. So I'm excited for people to listen to it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the pieces he talks about is this idea of vulnerability, and I just totally butchered that. And he did a great job of sharing that with us. And one of the final pieces he talked about, and was this idea of like believing in, you know, yourself and having other people tell you they believe in you along that journey. And everybody who listens to this show, anybody who joins our newsletters, everybody is on their own path and they're just trying to improve. Everybody, me, Gabe, everybody. And I'm here to tell you, like, I believe in you along your journey. And I believe in Gabe along his journey because we're being intentional with trying to improve, right? Every day we're setting our intention, whether it's your fitness, whether it's your faith, whether it's being, you name the thing, right? I believe in you and where you want to go. You just got to believe in yourself. And I'm also saying that to myself. So that was a big takeaway from this episode. Towards the end, he shines even more light on that. I really enjoyed Nathan's episode with us. I appreciate him for being on. I appreciate you guys for listening and working on that self-improvement that we all are on that same journey for. If you get value from this episode, simple ask, share with a friend. I'm confident you will. And that's how this podcast grows. That's also how more people get impacted. So share with a friend. And without any further ado, let's dive in a great episode with Nathan Mansfield. Let's get it. So talk to me about the culture that's set in the house when you have 3 young boys. You know, I think that there's something about resilience that comes up at a young age. And when you watch a young boy or a boy turn into a man who's grown up their entire life, like roughhousing and having like these brothers, I imagine it starts to instill certain characteristics that are hard to like, they're hard to compete against later on in life because his entire life, they've just been like battling, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. What do you see already? Because how old are your sons?
I got 4, 6, and 12.
So do you think they're too far? Do you think are they far enough apart where they don't really like wrestle and beat each other up all the time, or are they not? Or the 4 and 6-year-old battle all the time and the 12-year-old's kind of like doing his own thing?
Yeah, well, the 4 and the 6-year-old battle all the time. Everything's a competition. I can't remove competition from their vocabulary. I can't. It's from how quick they can get dressed, who goes pee first in the morning, who eats their food the quickest. I mean, everything is a competition. I can't stop it. The 12-year-old though, he'll play with them at their level. You know, like he roughhouses with them, and it's just obviously not a competition for him because he's much bigger. But
yeah, I think a great place to start on this conversation is like a little bit more about your background. You know, you and I, we got connected. We had a great conversation. I know what you're doing with Crucible, and I know a lot about your background, but I'd love to, in your own words, kind of describe like how you got to where you're at, you know, because you're mentoring men, you're doing different things, but like there was a background that got you to where you're at today. And so I was curious if we could just kind of start there in this conversation and then pivot into a bunch of stuff I want to talk about, in particular, faith. I think that's a really great topic to discuss, but perhaps you could just kind of lay some framework on how you got to where you're at and how you started Crucible.
Yeah. So, I mean, truthfully, it's all come full circle because I grew up with 5 sisters, no brothers. So I had no male competition growing up. Broken home, parents divorced when I was 1.5, 2, watched them fight over custody battles and all kinds of nonsense that was just total chaos. So I grew up in chaos. and, watched families split. Both parents married partners who were not really bought into me and my sister. So, that was all about their new family. So it almost felt like we kind of got left by the wayside. Stepfather, he's passed now. He passed of cancer a few years ago, was a complete asshole. Nothing was ever good enough. It's like, I always tell the story of like my parents owned a restaurant, and I started working in the restaurant for $4 an hour when I was 12. And he would bring in pallets of softener salt, which are like, those bags are like 60 pounds each. I was 12 years old, probably weighed like, I don't know, 90 pounds maybe. I was a small kid. And I would unload, hundreds of bags down these stairs and all the way into this corner where I would stack the salt up. And I would try my hardest to just get some sort of praise or admiration or recognition from my stepfather. But I could spend 3-4 hours laboring my ass off. And it would be like, you fucked this up. That wasn't good enough. Why did you do that, you dumbass? And so that's the nature of what I grew up from my stepfather. My stepfather, really, I was with my mom more. So that was really the fatherhood that I grew up with, which made me, when you fast forward, and I'll just kind of go through the rest of my story, but when you fast forward, it's why I've been a high performer, because, my stepfather instilled in me that nothing was ever good enough. So I think broken people become high performers because we have that inside of us that I told myself it was never good enough. So what do? I strive to win and to compete and to make more money and all these things, because inside I'm fighting this worthiness battle of myself. But, essentially what that troubled kid made me, that part of my family, I got very rebellious. I didn't like law and order and rules. And so my parents, I was the youngest. And so they tried to control my sisters. And when they got to me, they were just like, we ain't got a shot. So I felt early in, like 15, I fell into alcohol, started partying. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was my escape from the shitty parenting and households that I was in. So I just found out. I was also very insecure as a kid. Had low levels of confidence. I was a small kid, got picked on at a young age. And then I just found my defiance growing up. But I would get drunk because it would make me feel comfortable being here. Yeah. It numbed me, but it made me feel comfortable and confident in who I am. It gave me that, So I was like the life of the party, and people liked me. And inside I was really a quiet kid, an introverted kid that I felt like really was just weird and different. And I feel like I didn't fit in. And so alcohol made me fit in. It made me talk more. It made me funny. It made people like me, but it also was meeting needs of numbing all the shit that was happening in my house. So just quickly, I go to college, couldn't wait to get out of my small town. Knew I was never a small town kid. Never wanted to be a small town adult, I guess you would say. So I went to Manhattan, Kansas, to Kansas State University as an architectural engineer. I was actually gifted with quite a bit of intelligence, luckily, with mathematics things. I could survive and do well in school without really trying. So I had that giftedness, but I went to go be an engineer because I thought I could use this intelligence that I was given. But once again, fell deep into partying, getting blackout drunk 3-4 nights a week, and had this come to Jesus moment that was just like, dude, you're going to have to do something different. Like, this is not working. And I kind of had this idea that I was going to probably fail out of college and wind up in a dead ass job, probably be dead in a ditch because I was getting drunk, drinking and driving, doing dumb things. And so I'd remembered as a young kid, I loved military and war, and I loved the thought of serving. And my uncle was a retired gunnery sergeant. And so I called him up one day. I was like, hey man, college ain't going well. I'm failing out. I want to join the military. What do you suggest? And he goes, well, don't join the Marines. Don't join the Army. He's like, if you want a good life, join the Navy or the Air Force. And so went to an Air Force recruiter. Man, everybody was so caught off because I was like so embedded and meshed in my college group and friends. And that it was just like literally 30 days later, I was out just on a plane. And so the military, when I look at that, I don't know how deep you want me to go, but the military, it was really the saving grace of probably my whole life. But also I was so rebellious and didn't want rules and things that actually put me into a place where I learned how to have discipline and how to respect authority and how to take care of myself and how to have goals and aspirations and actually not get sucked into my environment, but work in a different environment where I could succeed. And so I thrived in the military. Was in for 13 years, ended up doing 10 years of special operations, and never had a negative piece of paperwork written on me. And if you looked at my past, I was the kid that when I walked into a classroom, teachers would kick me out before I even got 4 steps in. They'd be like, Nathan, you're out, get out, go to the principal's office. I'm like, I didn't even say anything. So going from this rebellious kid of like not respecting authority and being just living on the edge all the time to going to the military, where I didn't get written up a single time in 13 years. In fact, I had a pure, clean track record, lots of awards and decorations and deployments. It was definitely the thing that made me who I am, being how I grew up in a broken home, 5 sisters, not knowing what masculinity is. And it's so funny that God is now using me for the thing that I didn't have as a child. No father, no good male role model, 5 sisters, just me kind of alone is how I felt as a child.
I have a question on that. And then, I want to go back just real quick. I just have a question on this, and then I know Gabe has more, but with your stepdad. So what's interesting for me is like, you're moving these salt pellets, and like, I'm very familiar with those because my dad growing up, we had a water softener, and the water softener required these big bags of salt pellets, which I think are like you said, 50, 60 pounds. Now I didn't have to carry them. Down any stairs or whatever, but I would just like take them out of the car and bring them into the garage, which not nearly as far. But you know, it's similar experience. And what I'm curious about is, where is that line? So your stepdad was like hard on you, like never gave you praise. Nothing was ever good enough. And I could understand that perspective. And then there's this opposite side that like, you could do no wrong. Everything is winning. Where do you think is that balance? And I'm curious, like, if, I don't know, how are you with your sons? Do you praise them obviously more than your stepdad did, but how much is too much? And then how much isn't enough? Yeah.
I think there's a delicate dance. And the reason I know this is because in the dichotomy of my home, my stepfather was the nothing's ever good enough. Don't even pay attention to, don't acknowledge you that you're even there. If he's just watching TV, eating food, you don't even exist. To my mom, who was trying to make up for his neglect, would be like, I'm so proud of you. And I'm like, I just took out the trash, Mom. I'm like, you know what I mean? Like it was way too much. And it was like smothering, and it felt inauthentic. So the great thing is I saw both sides growing up. So now how I am with my boys is that I believe I'm a man of God. I'm a Christian. And so I believe what God, if you look at, man, I've been listening so much from Mark Driscoll and some other really good pastors. He talks about the father love of God. And what I look at is my kids is that God, I try to father like God fathers me as his son. And it means that God will never condemn me, but he will correct me. And that he will be hard on me. He will allow me to learn hard lessons. He will correct me, but regardless of my mistakes, he still loves me. He loves me more than anything else in the world, right? I'm his masterpiece. And so I think about when I father my children, it's like, what is God's true love for me? And there's what in Christianity is we balance truth and grace. It means that I have to be able to have hard conversations and discipline and correct. And I spank my kids, you know, if they get to the point where it needs to get there, then I'll do that. But also I balance that very fine with when I notice good things, I speak life into them. And I think this is a big piece, brother, that most men miss. And I think most men have never had this, is you do, for men especially, there's so many different Instagram verses and Twitter verses about this, but men need life spoken into them. They need acknowledgement. We have one sole mission as a man in this life, and it's predicated on what we do for other people, because we are servants at heart. We are leaders, protectors, and providers. And so if we are not recognized for how we lead, protect, provide, we feel worthless. We feel useless, right? And so it's so important. Men need acknowledgement and praise, but it also, they need truth, and they need correction, and they need discipline. And so I don't really weigh it like, you know, did I praise him enough? Like for me, it's just, it's a natural language for me. If I see my kids doing something good, man, I'm so proud of you. You did such a good job. Every day I drop my 4-year off at school. I said, man, you're such a good kid. You're an incredible kid, and you're handsome, and you're awesome, and you can do big things. And I tell him this every single day. And I look at, and one day he'll recognize when he's 25, 30, that I spoke that into him every day. I do it to my 6-year-old too. But I think you can never give too much praise. And actually, the more praise you give, the easier it is to discipline, and the easier it is to give truth. There's this thing called the invitation challenge. It's if you want your culture of your home and your employees to be empowered, you have to pour. The more you pour into them, the more you give, the more you praise, the more relationship capital you have to withdraw and correct, right? If you're in a marriage and all you get is criticism, eventually you're not going to be able to perform. Like you're going to feel disempowered by that person. You're not going to want to receive criticism when there is no praise. And so I think praise and acknowledgement is key, but it allows the relationship capital to make withdrawals when you need to correct.
I think that a lot of what you shared just there, what makes it hard though, is that it requires you to be on and intentional literally 100% of the time. Like you're either praising and acknowledging even the little things that they're doing right, and you're also course correcting as soon as you can to nip bad behavior in the bud, right? And I think that what a lot of parents, and I now that we're in it, it can be overwhelming to have that pressure on you that like literally everything they do should get either some praise or some correction, right? Within a scale of like, hey, that was a very little thing. Let's not color on the wall. Or, hey, it's really sweet how you're being with your new sister versus like, them doing something like really big. So I think that's where it gets tough, but it should be hard, right? Like this parenting thing is a lot of work. And I think that being open and honest about that, knowing that that's the expectation is important, because when I think you start falling short is you get lazy on both sides. You get lazy on correcting the thing that you should be correcting until it becomes a really big issue. And then it just becomes this overblown thing, or not praising the little things, and then, waiting for it to be a big thing. And then kids kind of become, we've talked about this with other guests, like very just results driven. And they feel like they need to like do this incredible thing to like earn your love versus like getting your love every step of the way just for being, right? Like the things that you're telling your kid when you're dropping him off, like, you're such a good kid. You're such a you're awesome, right? Like he didn't necessarily have to do anything extraordinary that morning to earn that praise from you. He's just getting it. And I think that, I love that you bring this stuff up, because I think it really hammers home one thing that I've been thinking a lot about, which is, hey, we signed up for this and it's a 24/7 gig. Like I need to be
no days off, buddy.
No minutes off. Like literally like praising, correcting 24/7. And I think that that's where you get that balance. To answer Jason's question of, it's not so much about thinking about like what is too much of one, too much of the other. It's just finding if you should be praising or correcting every step of the way.
Yeah, that's good. So good.
I had a question, man, just going back to the story that you gave us, and two things. One thing is, do you remember there being like a specific moment though, that kind of sparked that come to Jesus moment? Because I think that's such a big step, right? Such a big step to go from, being comfortable if you want to call it, with like leaning on alcohol and all of these things, being the center of the party, so on and so forth, and making this huge decision of like, calling, I think you said your uncle up and being like, hey, I'm making this huge life change and going towards this thing that's like 100% rules and discipline and all that. Usually I feel like when people kind of have that turn, it's like something happened that was like, whoa. We got to course correct here. I know that you mentioned that you thought that, in a couple of years, things wouldn't end well, but was there any specific like thing that you remember?
Well, it was progressive in nature, because it was the amount of times I was literally getting blackout drunk. I don't mean I was just getting drunk or drinking. I was literally not recollecting what I did the night before the next day, multiple times a week. But then there was this morning where I woke up, me and my friends, I grew up in Kansas, so we like to duck and goose hunt. And we had a layout blind that we take out hunting, and I brought it from my closet, and I woke up in that layout blind in the living room with my 22 with me. And I woke up and I was like, dude, what the fuck are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Like this has
You
gone
woke
too
up
far.
in the living room with a rifle like in your hand.
Rifle next to me in the duck blind.
Yeah, that's not good. Yeah.
And that means I was handling the weapon when I was highly intoxicated.
Right.
And I was just like, man, this is enough. I literally called my uncle that day. I said, hey man, I need some help. And so that was just enough. I had snapped, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. The environment and like just everything together has just put a cancer in my life.
Yeah, that's a moment right there, man, for sure. One thing that me and Jay talked about on an episode, I vividly remember this because it was my dad's birthday, and I wanted to give him a shout out because my dad has been awesome. And me and Jason are very fortunate that we grew up with, I consider my dad, a great example of what I want to be as a father. But one thing that Jason mentioned on that podcast, and I think you're a great example of listening to your story and listening to kind of the shift that you're trying to be now, given what you didn't have and what you're trying to provide now, is that, we're lucky that we have an example to, that we learn from and we're trying to step forward. But it's also a conscious decision to, if you didn't have that, to kind of like reverse that trend now, right? And give your sons the example to hopefully what they can be moving forward. So I think that, that's one thing that I was thinking a lot about while you were telling that story is, the cards you're dealt are the cards you're dealt. And I think that, you have that choice then to, if you've been dealt a great hand, be super grateful and use that as an example to be even a little bit better than what we're trying to do. But also like, hey man, if you didn't have these things, you can either be the victim and blame all the hardships that you have on the fact that you didn't have these things, or you could be like, hey man, I'm going to turn this around. I'm going to, trend in the different direction. Now your kids, sound like they're going to grow up and say, hopefully some of the things that, we've said about our dad on a podcast someday. And I think that that's pretty cool. And a cool example of that, bringing it full circle to when we talked about that on the show. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. I know that.
Just something that's like really on topic for this is like the praise thing. I've really been reflecting on this in particular with sports. And, I this is like very near and dear to like where I'm at right now. My son in particular, he's 10, he's going through playoff baseball. And yesterday he had like a really important game. It was a do or, win or lose game. And he closed out pitching. Right. And he did his thing. We ended up winning. It was a team effort, of course, 100%, but he was the final person on the mound. And it's interesting because you see our entire family there. We had like 10 of our family there and everybody wants to give them praise and all this stuff. And so I've really had to check myself because it's so easy, and everybody else around there, when you see like a moment, right, where, I don't know, you get the final hit or you get the final whatever, to be like, wow, we're so proud of you. But I've really had to try and check myself because what I'm worried about is he's not always going to get W's all the time. And so like we're going to the car, and I keep saying this to him each game, and I think he's probably getting sick of it, but I'm like, hey, Caden, like you did a really great job today. I'm proud of you and our family's proud of you, regardless of how you performed, because you went out there and did your best. But good job. It's like this, it's so weird, right? But you got me thinking about more about that, right? Like this constant, like you're 24/7, you're always on, but especially right after sports, and trying to keep their love for it and not have their self-worth or their whatever based on their performance. I think that's been something that's really been hitting home for me as of recently.
Yeah, I think the important thing about that, brother, is that you still tell them that you love them regardless, even when they're not doing something good. You know what I mean? I think the amount of stories I've heard from people I've talked to, even in my own journey, is that most fathers don't say I love you. I think that if you're a father that says I love you to your child in a regular basis, you're a rarity as a father. I think that when you acknowledge and that you say that you love them on a continual basis, regardless of whether they're performing or not, that's what creates that differentiating factor of, okay, it's not performance-based love, right? Because man, that's a deep wound. I have a performance-based love type of wound. And it's, like I said, it's made me, it's created a lot of success for me, but man, at the cost of a lot of pain too. And I think we don't want that for our kids. We want them to be high performers, but we don't want them to think that they're only loved, that they're only good enough when they perform at a high level.
Yeah. And that kind of brings me to one of the questions I wanted to ask you about. I do think you have a unique vantage point on this. So you go through the military and you come out and you have all these life experiences, right? Obviously having kids and whatnot. Now you're, Crucible, is it appropriate to call it like a mentorship group? Is that an appropriate, oh,
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about is that as mentoring men through Crucible, what have you seen as one of the common denominators for men that you support? Because you brought up one right now, right? Like, hey, you are an anomaly if you're telling your kid you love them as a dad. And it's interesting. I do think some of that is shifting more. I do. I think that in our generation, like all of us here, I think it's more common. I think in our parents' generation, it was non-existent, at least in my in my experience. But I'm curious, like, what is a common denominator that you see across thousands of men that holds them back from reaching their potential? That they're stuck, or maybe that they're not unlocking? What's something like just like speaks out at you?
They don't feel like they're good enough. They don't feel like they're worthy. The object seems too far away. It seems it's all a mental, psychological battle of not being good enough or not worthy of the result that they want. And that's a deep, deep belief, because, on the surface, it's procrastination, it's self-sabotage, it's potential laziness. It's, I think that everybody looks, and this is what I realized being a coach for so long and coaching so many people, is that the problem is way, way deeper than they think it is. They think it's just the surface level. It's the symptoms, right? But there's the reason that you self-sabotage, the reason that you procrastinate, the reason that you give up on yourself, the reason that you can't handle stress is a lot deeper to the internal. I try to get to the internal belief. Every single person has a deep belief about themselves, and most people aren't aware of it. It took me till I was, I started doing personal development when I was 26. I'm 36 now. I don't think I even learned about myself deeply until I was like 34, 35. And that was at a near suicide, that I had to look at myself in the mirror and go, okay, we got to figure out what's going on way down in you, and not try to treat all these problems that are on the surface. It's like medical care, right? Like doctors will just prescribe you the shit to make you feel good and to get rid of the symptoms. But if you don't treat the condition deep inside, then you'll just kill yourself on the meds, right? Or you just numb them long enough to where you don't feel anymore. But most men that I work with and that I see, there is a worthiness and a not good enough issue that stems from broken fatherhood.
Man, I appreciate you bringing that up. So I don't know if Jason gave you a heads up, but this episode is going to come out in June as part of this like shoulder to shoulder month that we're putting out, because it's Men's Mental Health Month, to kind of just bring awareness to, not the fact that mental health isn't an issue for women. It's obviously an issue that impacts both, but I think that it's not talked enough, and there isn't enough awareness on the men's side. And so you bringing up the fact that, that there was a near suicide involved, and that a lot of people, are maybe not getting to the deep root of what is impacting what you could call their mental health. What role, two things that you talk a lot about, and kind of going through Instagram and a lot of the Crucible stuff before recording this, are faith and vulnerability. So yeah. I'd love to dive a little bit into both, and how those play into the solution that you're getting at to what you're saying, like that deep issue that's rooted in some of the men that you work with.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I grew up, like, just a quick background of my history and faith. I grew up in the Catholic and the Lutheran church, very legalistic, if you sin, you go to hell kind of thing. And me as a rebellious kid was like, yeah, I ain't dealing with that. That seems like it's more of my brain just couldn't understand it. Like, is our God really a God that if you sin, he's sending you to burn in flames? Is that really like, that doesn't seem like a good God. And so I ran from this false theology of that's what faith was. And then even so much to where even 4.5 years ago, I was debating if Jesus even lived, because I was ignorant, didn't even know much about the Bible or faith. I just made assumptions. And so I would almost make fun of people that were Christians. Like, you really believe that they wrote this Bible, and you really believe that David and Goliath and all this, you really believe the story of the whale and that he was swallowed.
Yeah, or all the stories I'm currently listening to the book of John, and they're just nonstop talking about, stories of Jesus and the miracles that he had.
Yeah. And so I questioned faith for a long time until I almost killed myself. And I knew that the story of that is that I was not a believer in Christ. I was really agnostic, I guess you would call it. I believed in a God. I didn't believe in Christ. And so I really just knew that there was probably a God or something out there. But I had dove into new age stuff, meditation, that spirituality side of things. And it was so unfulfilling. But at my near suicide, I was going through the hardest time of my life. I'd just gone through a nasty divorce. My ex-wife was making up lies and things, spreading them across her 500,000 followers, creating just massive controversy about me that was not true. It was genuinely not true. And so then with that, my business started going downhill. We were doing multiple millions a year. And so my business took a hit because everybody thought I was this bad person. And so everything was falling apart in my entire life. Everything. My finances were draining. My reputation was gone. Like everything that could happen happened. I didn't feel like I could be present with my kids because I was worried about so many other things. I was worried about my reputation, how I looked. And so I kept seeing the number 444. And I researched it one day. It was like, I kept seeing it on my phone and everything. I was like, what is that? And it's an angel number that just means that, angels are watching over you. And so it gave me hope in the moments where I was really struggling and I had no male friends. So I wouldn't reach out to men for support. I was just suffering alone. This is part of the reason Crucible exists today. I was just suffering alone in this mental shame. And it got to a place where it got really dark. And I was like, my kids went back to their mom. And I decided that I was just going to leave and I wasn't coming home. I started to head up the road to Austin, and I didn't know how I was going to take my life, but I knew I was never coming home. And on the way to Austin, there's an attorney that's numbers 444-4444. I saw that on the billboard and I started screaming out my car, God, if you were there, please save me because I can't save myself. I was screaming in the top of my lungs in my car with the windows down, driving 85 miles an hour to Austin. And I pull in to Lady Bird Lake and I began to look at the lake and I was like, man, what would it be like to drive my car in here? How am I going to end this? Do I need to find a weapon? Am I going to drown myself in this lake? Whatever it is. And so I was like, God kept tugging on me like, hey, just stay with me for a second. And I was fighting this nasty spiritual battle. And I pull into the parking lot of the JW Marriott. I was like, let me just rest for a minute and think this over before I end it. And I pull in the parking. There's this long driveway down to the parking garage underneath the JW. And I get out and I park in the first stall closest to the door. And as I walk out of my car, I look and I parked in the stall 444. And I was like, whoa, this is crazy. And so for me, that was enough for me to abort the mission. I was like, I've seen this number twice. This has been the one thing that's kept me hopeful over the last 2 months. And I was like, this is, if God is there, he's talking to me and he's telling me to not do this. And then I started thinking about my kids and I was like, man, I can't leave my kids like this. And so I stayed the night at that JW and drove back home the next day and really began to become very curious about God. I actually found God through the places that I struggled the most. And that was with women and lust. I began to date a couple girls after that divorce. One of the girls she asked me to do devotionals with her. And I was like, what's a devotional? And she's like, well, let's go to a coffee shop and read the Bible or listen to a sermon. And I was like, this is interesting. I was very open-minded to it after I believe God had saved me. And she bought me a Bible with my name on it. And I told myself, we'd only been dating for like a month. I told myself that if this goes south, because I knew that I would do things to appease women, to make them like me more. It was the lack of worthiness I had inside of me. And so I was like, if this goes south and we break up, Nathan, commit to continue to read this Bible. And so I continued to do that. Then I met another girl who took me to church, who was just a girl I dated for a couple months. And so women led me to church, and I found CBC here in San Antonio and found a very anointed pastor. And since then, a couple months later, I gave my life to Christ. Now the pastor that talked with me after I gave my life to Christ is now my business partner. So it's a crazy story about my faith, but man, it's with that, you asked about vulnerability. And what I learned through faith is that I had to be vulnerable about my story. And so I was out of the blue was asked to speak. People had heard about my story on social media, that I wanted to be on stages and speaking to people to influence them about mental health. And within like a month after I had started telling my story and being vulnerable, which I was very scared of as a man, this guy reached out to me. He's like, hey, I want you to come speak to our college, 500 people. And so I went and told my story in front of this college about my near suicide and where God saved me. And it's just been a journey since, of just getting closer and closer to him. And it's, man, life with him and life without him is completely different. Dude,
that's an incredible story, Nathan. Thank you for sharing that. It's and kudos to you for being open-minded to the signs, right? Like, I mean, I think that obviously, like, you were also kind of seeking the signs, and they presented themselves for you.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
I have my journey's not quite the same. But I grew up in the Catholic church, right? And private Catholic school. And it was very much stand up, sit down, do this, do that. It was it wasn't uplifting. It wasn't inspiring for me. And as of recently, my daughter and I have been going to this Christian church, and it's just a completely different energy. It's a completely different vibe. And, I didn't get it until as of recently. A buddy of mine, his name's Paul Gomez. He was one of the original guys who started up Hurley, and he's just been in the surf industry forever. He used to always tell me, he's like, Jason, you're getting wrapped up in the difference between having a relationship with Christ and religion. He goes, he goes, you don't understand. Like, and at the time I'm like, wait, what do you mean? Like, we have to go to the church. He's like, no, he's like, I'm the most faith-based man you'll ever meet, but I never go to church because I have, men's group where we read the Bible and we talk about our relationship with Christ. And anyways, as of recently, I've been kind of thinking more about that. So I appreciate you sharing this. We actually have Dan Bailey coming on the show, who's, I heard him one time share his kind of, what do you call it when you like testimony. And we'll be sure to ask him similar, but I appreciate you sharing yours, man. That was really powerful.
Yeah. Appreciate you asking.
All right, we are taking a quick break from the podcast to talk about what we have going on in the month of June at Train Hard. So one of the things that's become increasingly apparent with what Jason has going on with the Train Hard Men's Club and just all these conversations we've been having on the podcast is that while there are some obvious physical benefits to training hard and fitness, it pales in comparison to the mental health benefits of working out, of training, and doing that alongside other people. So for the month of June, we have this shoulder to shoulder campaign going on. And what that is our effort to bring awareness to the specific challenges that men are facing when it comes to mental health. We have some awesome guests on the podcast for the month of June. We're talking about this in the newsletter, and we have a patch for sale on the Train Hard shop where all proceeds from that patch, so all proceeds from the shoulder to shoulder Train Hard patch, are going to be donated to Movember, a nonprofit that we're super stoked to be working with because they're doing some great work. Again, also bringing awareness to the challenges, but actually putting out programs and taking action to help solve and provide solutions for suicide prevention, helping deal with anxiety, depression, all these things that are super beneficial to men. So if you want to participate in that, if you want to support that cause, we're super fired up about it. You can go on the Train Hard shop for that shoulder to shoulder patch. All proceeds are going to go to Movember, or you can just share this podcast, share the newsletter, help us continue to have this conversation. But let's get back to the show. Nathan, how do you start having the discussion or putting out something to the listeners here about becoming a little bit more vulnerable and even just starting the conversation, whether that's the conversation about like curiosity about, Christ and faith, or like literally just like, hey, like, I'm not feeling super great. And here's why with someone, with anyone.
Yeah.
And because I think that, a lot of the like stats that we've kind of seen and stuff that we've talked about on earlier episodes of this kind of month and this topic specifically is it's not necessarily that men are, have more mental health issues. It's just that they don't seek help. They don't seek treatment. Yeah. There's like this stigma behind even, saying that that's something like I'm anxious, I'm depressed, like whatever. Then it's like, well, just kind of man up. So what is kind of like some more concrete advice to like open up and find the way to be vulnerable and have those conversations? Who do you reach out to? Who do you talk to? Like, who is the person that you should, try and have these conversations with first? If it's something that like you're listening to this now and you're like, man, like I could use someone to talk to.
Yeah. Well, I think it starts with this is how I coach is I think there has to be first a firm understanding of why. So if you look at what are the reasons, so I think it's 5 out of 7 suicides are men. What broad question, why is it this way? Well, just like you said, there's a stigma. You're not a man. That's what we've grown up with, right? That you're not masculine. You're not a man. Don't be a pussy. Don't be a bitch. Don't talk about your feelings. And so, okay, there's a reason why, right? I feel as if I open up about what I'm going through, that I'm struggling, that I'm not going to be a man. And so there's this false belief. Okay, let's just figure out the truth is that that's a false belief. That's not true. You can still be a man and still be able to share and let things off of your chest. It's God created us to do this. If you hold everything in, tell me how that's going to benefit you, right? Okay, but I get the fear, right? And so then we have to address the fear. Well, what's the fear? The fear is that if I'm vulnerable means giving someone something to basically attack you back, to attack you, to hurt you, right? That's what vulnerability is. And so when you look at men who are afraid to be vulnerable, they're afraid that when they release something about how they feel, that can be used against them. Okay, so then let me ask the question. If that is the truth, then I am being led by fear. And if you want to go spiritual with this, is fear from God or is fear from the devil? Fear is from the enemy. It's from the devil. The devil wants to have you entangled and enmeshed in fear. Why? Because then he can control your entire life. And so if I'm a man who doesn't feel enough courage to speak about things that I feel and hardships that I'm enduring, that I'm being run by the devil. I'm being controlled, keyword, by fear. So if that has never gotten you anywhere, which it hasn't, then what's the opposite? So I have to think about this. If I were to do something opposite, if holding things in and balling them in and not talking about them makes me crawl into a deep hole of depression, I feel like shit about myself. Okay, well, that pattern is not serving me. So what if I did the opposite? And here's what I find with Crucible, because I'm very open. I'm very vulnerable. I didn't used to be this way. I wasn't this way at 33. I wasn't this way before. But now I'm not afraid to speak about the things that I'm going through. And so when I do that in front of my men in Crucible, and then I ask them to do the same, all of our live events, we crack open their deepest fears and vulnerabilities. And they got to talk about it in front of everybody. And what you find is that once all men are actually just the same as women, is that when you're enduring something hard or challenging or you're scared, is that actually when you just say it out loud, it releases like 70 to 80% of the burden that you feel. It's not actually that you need the problem solved. It's like if you're dealing with like hard financials, maybe you're about to go into bankruptcy, but you can just go tell someone that you trust, like, hey man, I'm dealing with this financial thing and it's really challenging for me. And I'm really worried about this thing. That alone will get most of the weight off your shoulders. But think when you ball it in, it's like you're like a volcano that's ready to explode, right? And you can't navigate it. But part of this, what you said too, is like a lot of men we're all so numb to our feelings, is that we also don't know what we feel, and that's a problem. But also the second piece is that you got to have someone that is willing to listen. And this is why I could go on for hours. I want to be considerate of time, but there's a big issue with men creating real male friendships. And that's another reason why I've created Crucible, so that men understand that it's safe and it's okay to be around men, and not just to drink beer and watch sports with, but also actually to do life with. It's what Jason, part of your life's mission and what you do with your weekly workouts. It's men just doing life together. But I think men isolate once they get families and a wife and kids, then they don't take time to go spend time with other men. And that's an issue too, because then when you are going through hard things, you got no one to help you out. You got no one to talk to. And truthfully, I believe that men were meant to be in relationship and friendship and brotherhood with other men. And so you've got to work to build that. You've got to work to build people that you trust. But why? I'll end this part with this. Yeah. Is that I now have friends that when I'm doing something dumb, that when I'm acting a certain way, that can give me the truth. Like, hey, dude, you are overextending yourself. Hey, man, I noticed you're on this pattern, but also I can be vulnerable and be like, man, if I was dealing with this, I've been watching porn every night. And they can be like, bro, next time you want to watch porn, call me before you do it. Call me and talk to me and tell me about your struggle, because it is truly Proverbs, iron sharpens iron. Like, we need men. And when we have them in our lives, it strengthens us. It allows us to be vulnerable. It allows us to get all the burdens off of our chests and allows us to be the man that we were called to be. But without it, you are lonesome, you are sorry, and you are in a deep and dark place that is really hard to get out of.
Dude.
One thing, and I think I've talked about this on the podcast too, that I don't have a solution for, but is something that I recognize is tough because we're kind of going through it now in this kind of respect of like, having male friends or having like a male, kind of like group, is when you start transitioning. So like, all of my peers, most of my peers, like my really close friends, haven't had kids yet. So like when you transition into what's a very different stage of life, and other of what, are my best friends, I would still consider them my best friends, just aren't there yet. I feel like it makes it that much tougher to have conversations about some of the stuff that like we're going through, just because like, I don't know, like I can't expect them to relate. I think it's unfair for me to expect them to relate because they're so different. So I feel like, you kind of, regardless of kind of the transition you are from one season of life to another, I think that those differences or those changes are difficult to navigate because many times you'll essentially leave a group of friends behind potentially, whether, you start doing a whole bunch of personal development. And now you're like, hey, like, I'm not going to go out all the time. I'm not going to do all these things. Whether you start like caring about your fitness and nutrition. And now you're like, hey, like, I'm not going to eat that stuff. Like I got to get a workout in the morning. Like all these changes that are positive, but they kind of like pull you from like your existing circle. Yeah. How do you navigate that when you're in that like limbo of, well, I don't really share the same like passions and season of life as who I used to be very close with, but I've also haven't been in this world potentially long enough? Because Jason tells me all this time, and I know it's true. Like, once kids start doing sports together and once like, all that starts happening, like we'll meet people that are in that stage of life. But what's some advice for being in that like in between where you haven't quite gotten there yet, but you're also like no longer where your friends used to, or no longer where your friends are now?
Yeah. I think that if you're a person that is driven by growth and that you're still hanging on to friends that are from a decade plus prior, that they're not after the same things, there's always going to be issues. And so part of this is just accepting that once again, I'm just going to keep hammering it because I am a man of faith, but that God will place the right people in your life in the right season. And that when you understand that not everybody that's been with you is for you, and that you can release that control, it lets a lot off your shoulders. But it also, I always look for people, at least one or two friends that are at least 10 years my senior. And the reason is because of their wisdom and knowledge. I've got a couple, even my business partners are really good friends. We do life together every single day. I go to the gym with them. Like we're brothers. But when I go to take advice, I don't take advice from the guys that are right in my circle. I take advice from guys that are 10 years my senior. If I need to vent about something, my pastor, he's 40, I think he's 43, 44. He's almost 10 years older than me. I go to him when I got marriage issues, I'm going to the guy that's been married for 25 years and that can listen and give me good advice, godly advice, right? So I'm very careful with who I ask advice from and who I talk to about certain problems. But also I'm on the lookout for people who are farther along than me that can give me the wisdom that I need to make good choices that I can relate with better, right? And so I think it's just, there is a transition, but it is an intentional transition that says, okay, I recognize that three or four these four friendships may or may not be for me for the long term. I see us maybe growing apart as I begin to have kids and life is different, and I'm okay with that. But also I need to be intentional and looking out for men that could come into my corner that would be an addition to my life and that could serve as a mentor and lead and help me understand things better, right? Like you want a mentor that's been a parent for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, or has been married, so that you can learn the best things to do from that person and not from the guy that doesn't have kids, because he can't understand you. And you shouldn't assume that he can understand you or even, try to make sense of that.
Well, and I think just a piece of that too, and I would just share is like, I talk to a lot of guys that are older than me, but I could get different things from different guys. That's one thing that I've found is that like, not everybody's going to be hitting, whatever. I don't even know baseball. I keep going back to baseball because it's playoff time, but not everybody's going to be, great at everything. Right. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. Right. You can have someone you get super inspired because their entrepreneurial spirit and their way that they do work, right. They do it ethically. They do it right. That same person might not be the person you look up to and be like, dude, that guy is dadding well. Like they're being a good father. Or, hey, that guy's been married for, whatever, many years, like, let's go, so you could find different people I've been very blessed in many ways to find great people in different areas. I wanted to ask, you brought up the men's club. So every week, I get together, we're on like week 37. And every week we get a group of 30, 40, 50 guys to go do a workout in the parking lot. And that's one of the reasons why we like this shoulder to shoulder campaign. A friend of ours said, women make friends face to face, men make friends shoulder to shoulder. I kind of related to that. I thought that was a cool term, right? And so I'm curious, like, what role does training play? Because back to your point, this is a couple weeks ago, my daughter was in a residency program and it was just like not good. And I just go there and I'm just talking to the guy, like, how you doing? I'm like, well, dude, I got this thing going on. It really sucks. But let's go work out. And it wasn't like I needed a pity party. It wasn't anything. It just made me feel better because I just shared it and we moved on. And it wasn't like, they didn't even need to say anything. They're just like, dude, that sucks, bro. And it's like, all right. But it instantly made me feel better, right?
Yeah.
But to your point, we connected through training. So I'm wondering, especially what you're doing at Crucible, what role does training play? Because you and I talked a little bit about this, but what role does fitness play for the dads that are a part of your program or men? And is it literally like a non-negotiable? Like it's a prerequisite to everything else you're going to do.
Yeah. So out of every curriculum, everything that I preach, every recommendation I give, every tool strategy has physicality in it. And what I don't do is I don't go tell them to do what I do, because most of them, you got to meet people where they are. But it is a requisite for everything that we do, because I know that the two things that will make or break a man, and when they're combined together, it's synergistic, and that's your physical and spiritual health. If a man is dominating his physical and spiritual health, like practicing discipline, consistency, connection, he'll be like, everything else could be in shambles. His marriage could be in shambles, things could be in shambles. But if his physical and spiritual health are good, a man can withstand anything, right? And so physical, I always say that, the two are so closely bonded. It's interesting to me because you see so many spiritual men that are overweight. And it's what I'm trying to bring back to the church at large, is that men, like, you can't be a spiritual man and a spiritual leader and be 100 pounds overweight, right? Because one, what's happening inside of you is affecting what's up here too, right? Between your gut health and all your health, it's affecting your spiritual connection to God, I believe, right? So those are the two requisites.
But you think that if you're overweight, that it starts to interfere with your connection with God?
Absolutely, 100%.
I've never heard. I've heard a lot of reasons to get fit. Many, many reasons. I've never heard that one.
The reason, Jason, is because, and I might be the crazy guy that's going to say this because no one's ever taught me this, but it's something I've recognized in myself. But the reason is that if you're not healthy, like if you're eating seed oils, gluten, sugar, like it affects the way your brain works. And part of your connection to God, I believe, is having a healthy enough mind to be able to connect and have a relationship with God. That if you are unhealthy, and actually, it's so bizarre. I have a very renowned pastor that is a friend of mine, and all of a sudden he got really overweight, and he said it was a spiritual battle. That if you look at why people are overweight, it's a spiritual battle, bro. It's gluttony. It's the fact that you're trying to indulge in things that make you feel good, and that's from the devil. That's from the enemy. So if you're overweight, you're enduring a spiritual battle of some sort, because you're trying to cover it up and make it feel good by eating. You're trying to mask the pain. And so I believe that being overweight is a spiritual battle. And I believe that getting one of the best ways you can fight the enemy is, one, in prayer, but two, in working out. because dopamine, God created us to release dopamine and good, feel good chemicals and adrenaline. And so I think a lot of people have not made this connection. Maybe I'll be one of the first to do it, but I think two things that will make you an incredible man is prayer and working out and doing that consistently.
All right.
And I love when we have like different guests that like bring up a very, very similar thing with like slightly different takes. So another guest that we had this month, you know, his whole thing is physiology first. And he spoke at length, not on the faith side, but just on the whole, like mental health being just physical health, right? And how like everything you do with how you eat, how you sleep, like doing sauna, ice bath, doing all these things to improve your physical health. It isn't everything, but it's the foundation to everything else. And now hearing from you, very similarly, that again, like your physical health, what you're eating, the decisions you're making, like not only impact your mental health, but your spiritual health. I agree. I mean, I think there's something there, the commonality being that like, you have to be healthy. Like you have to prioritize your health, period. Like that is a non-negotiable because it's going to impact everything else. And it just makes everything else easier. And it also, like we've seen this, you know, being in the CrossFit space, the fitness space, Jay, is like, you know, once people start doing the one thing that's in their control, which is working out and doing that consistently, it fixes everything around it because you almost feel like, well, I'm putting all this work in the gym. Like I might as well be a little bit better with my nutrition, be a little bit better with my relationships, be a little bit better with all these other things, because it's like, otherwise I'm kind of like, you know, like spinning my wheels over here. Like it just, good leads to good, like you build momentum. So I love hearing that from you, Nathan, because we've heard it from other guests in a slightly different angle, but kind of the same underlying principle.
Yeah.
That was a good, that's a good, cause David, we were talking about this with physiology first, and it's like, man, Gabe, that's a great connection you're making, right? Cause they're saying the same thing, just in a little bit of a different way. You know, obviously Nathan's taking more of a faith-based approach, but he's still saying like, you got to be locked in there. Otherwise you're not going to reach your potential, or it's all stemming from this thing. Right. So this is a great, we got to put this one, we got to have this episode released right after David.
I think most people just don't see it that way. I think it's fine. It's fine that people don't, because I don't think it's a common connection that people make. But if you also look at the fact that the gut is the second brain, right? And if most people are eating so much sugar and toxin filled foods, right? So how can I, well, think about this too. This is how you get real taboo, is that everything that you put in your body is a frequency. It's a, you know what I mean? And so the truth of like, you are what you eat, that there is truth to that. Like that when you eat things, they're digested and made into new cells, and it becomes who you are. And so like, I firmly believe that it is really challenging to have a spiritual connection to God if you're clouded and not healthy. I think it's really challenging.
So where do you start with your men then? So, you know, guys come in and, you know, you say, hey, look, you got to have a framework and a foundation for your fitness. Like, where does that even start? Because I imagine a lot of these guys, maybe some of them, right, have been involved in sports or different things. But if you're living a sedentary lifestyle, what is your recommendation to kind of get off the couch and start? What words of wisdom do you give them to start creating habits towards this? Because it's a hard thing to build habits on. We've seen people that get dedicated for a month, dedicated for 2 months, and then boom, they fall off. So what do you find that helps them find a deeper why on why they should be improving their health and fitness?
Yeah, so there's several facets that go into this. One is most guys don't have a framework or structure, and so I have a guide that I call the Man Maker. It's essentially physical, mental, spiritual. It's a 1 hour check-in every single morning of just a checklist, because they're just like, I don't even know what to do. Well, for me, I just say do 44 minutes of movement every day. Like that's it. Like I don't care I don't care if you go for a walk, but just do 44 minutes of movement. That's the, you know, that you might go run 13 miles a day. It's different for everybody, but I can't, in a coaching group, you got to try to meet everybody where they're at. And I have some guys that are high performers that come and be like, man, we need to do something more challenging. I'm like, well, you go do your extra credit work, but I got to cater to everybody where they're at. So one part of my work specifically is the psychology piece. One of my business partners, he's very big on, he's my integrator. So he's very big on tools and things like that. And so he's really good at that. I invoke the emotion in people. And what I do is I awaken them. I look at myself as the guy that takes you by the shoulders when you're kind of clouded, a little fuzzy, a little stuck, a little unmotivated in this rut of life. And I'm going to take you by the shoulders and I'm going to shake you and wake you and tell you the truth about where you're headed and where you should be headed. And so I use some emotions in that, and I tell stories to get them excited about what could be and stop living where they are. Tony Robbins says that by the time you're 35, 85% of what you do is a subconscious program. And so I realized that my battle with men is waking them up from the subconscious program, because they all wake up, they go pee, they walk over, brush their teeth, they put on the clothes, they do the same thing every single day. And it's like they're a robot, right? Most people live very robotic lives. It's the same shit, different day. And so part of what I know I have to do to get people to wake up is to make them aware of their patterns, but also dig deep on what it would mean for them to change their life. One thing I always tell every single guy I coach is this, is you are the reason that you don't take life as seriously as you should is because you think you have this little impact on the world. But what you don't realize is this, is that you, say you're 25 years old and you come to me for coaching, you think that you might influence a few people over the course of your life, your family and some friends, and maybe a couple of people where you work with. You're not giving yourself enough credit and understanding what your true impact to the world will be. Every person that you interact with, you're making an impact, positive or negative. Whether you run into someone at a Starbucks line, or whether you're on a sports team, or whether you go to the gym, you have an impact on every single person you meet, positive or negative. Now imagine this. If you have a positive impact on people every single day, 5, 6, 7 people, 365, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, how many people have you personally had an impact on in the next 40 years? It could be millions of people and you don't even recognize it. So why is it important to get yourself right? Because you're either making the world a better place or a worse place. And you should choose to be a good steward of your life and to make the world a better place by every interaction that you have. And it doesn't mean you got to be perfect, but you treat people with respect. You empower people. You influence people. You show people how to be a better person. You work out hard, right? People will cling on to all these behaviors as you grow. And so when you begin to realize what your true impact is on the world and get out of your small bubble thinking, it'll change how you decide to show up.
Man,
I just wrote that down.
One of the things that I love about that, and I've never heard it broke down like that, but I love that because I think it ties into one thing that I'm a firm believer of, which is, I think a lot of people, and this used to be me, you're distracted by kind of these like big world problems and like, quote unquote, taking a stand to like, try and fix whatever big thing. And that's a distraction from working on yourself, because like you said, the impact you can really have is by being the best man that you can be and touching everyone that you touch, not worrying any % of your time on all these like, big problems that are either big problems or we're being told they're big problems, whatever, that a lot of people, I think, spend so much time and energy, like, like fighting for the cause, because it's just easier than like looking into yourself and being like, how can I be better so that I can have all those interactions be positive and have the type of impact that you spoke about. So I've never heard it put that way, but I think that I love how that does make it seem like you can have this huge impact by literally just working on yourself and not worrying about all the other
stuff.
And it doesn't have to be, I think what you just hit the nail on the head for me is like, I think like, okay, how can I make an impact? All right, I'm going to do the men's club. I'm going to do whatever. We can do this podcast, whatever. But what I've never thought of until you just said it is like, I went on a walk this morning with my daughter and we went to a local coffee shop. Like, what impact am I having on people there? Just like super low key, right? Just like, like, because now that I'm even saying it, it's like, what impact have others had on me low key? Like, meaning like you show up to the counter and the woman behind the counter is being super gracious, super uplifting and kind. All of a sudden it makes my day feel better. Like I'm being impacted by her. So why doesn't it work the opposite way, right? How come I can't impact her? Like, dude, I appreciate you saying that, because I think that we think oftentimes that impacts have to be done on like a macro scale, but I think they can be done on a micro scale over and over and over again.
The impact of and your legacy will be not by the big egregious things that you do for the world. It'll be by the depth in which you work on yourself to be a good man, and then how you treat people around you because of that, and how you influence people. You know, I think we oftentimes, and me, I'm so guilty of this, and you probably are too, is that we don't understand the true impact we had on people. I went to this big event a couple of months ago, and this guy came up to me and he's like, man, I follow you. I've been following you on Instagram for like a year. And I was like, oh, that's awesome, bro. And he's like, you were doing this barefoot mile every day. And I'm over here, you know, I got followers, but I just don't think anybody's paying attention to what I'm doing. Right. it's this mentality that I struggle with. And he's like, dude, why did you stop doing that? And I was like, well, it got summer and the concrete
floor is really hot. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm in Texas. And so but he's like, man, I was so inspired by that. I started doing barefoot miles every day. And I think it's just, we expect this big, grandiose, like change the world type of front. But the truth is we change the world one person at a time. And it could just be by saying, man, I just got off the phone with a guy, one of my clients, he called me. I haven't talked to him in a couple of months because he's in my group. And he just said, hey, man, I just want you to know how much you're doing for me in my life. And he's like, there's one day when you first met me that you told me that you believed in me. And this dude is now leaving his 9 to 5. He's starting a business. He's the happiest he's ever been in his marriage. And I was like, dude, this is the key. This is the key. When you tell someone, especially a man, that you genuinely believe in them, it can change their life forever. Because how many people how many men have ever heard that from another man? Imagine your son or someone else coming up to your son and saying, hey man, I just want you to know, I believe in you. I believe in you and what you can accomplish. How many times have you heard that? Like legitimately, like most men have never heard that. And when they have, maybe it's not from a good source, but regardless, like if you have influence or you don't, just that message of positivity towards someone, because rarely does anybody hear that, man, I believe in you. I really believe in you. It'll change a man's life forever. Few words.
Dude.
I have one last question for you, Nathan. I know we're running on time here, but I'm super curious. So
it's on you guys' clock. I don't care.
You know, when it comes to nutrition and fitness, we talked about this on an earlier episode. I feel like a lot of people, you know, put the barrier of what it means to start so high that they never start, right? Like they feel like, you know, it's like a full gym membership. It's like cutting out all sugar, all booze, all whatever. And they're like, that seems so overwhelming that they just put it off. They're like, I can't start. What would be your suggestion in terms of spiritual health? So in terms of faith, because I feel like for a lot of people, and you know, to be honest, I feel like maybe I fall under this bucket. It's the same thing, right? It's like, I tell myself that, you know, like starting that process is finding a church. It's reading the Bible every day. It's figuring all these things out. And then it just kind of like makes me kick the can down the road. What's the like, you know, because what I would tell people on the fitness and nutrition side is like, go for a walk, drink some more water every day.
Yeah.
Like super easy wins. Like you'll feel better if you do those two things. What's your kind of advice on the spiritual health side?
Yeah, it's super easy. This is what I was told before I was a Christian. I was dabbling with the Bible, and I had a guy, he bought me a book called The Richest Man Who Ever Lived, yes, physically he was the richest man who ever lived, King Solomon, who wrote the book of Proverbs. And he said, hey dude, he brought it up to me and I was like, what's the book of Proverbs? I get that on Amazon. I didn't know nothing about the Bible. and so I literally, for probably 6 months, without even dabbling into the New Testament, the Old Testament, really at large, I just read a proverb a day. And what that allows God to do is to begin to speak to you. Because even if you're not a believer in Christ, if you just read a proverb a day, it's how to be a good man. I mean, Proverbs is arguably the best source of wisdom for any man or any woman to read, really, but especially for men. Like Proverbs was created to teach young boys how to be great, how to be good men. And so if you just read a proverb a day in the day of the month, so Proverbs 1 on the first of the month, Proverbs 2 on the second of the month, it's a really easy thing that you can do in less than 5 minutes. That is not taxing. It's not trying to go understand what Revelations is all about when I don't even know what the trumpets and the horns and all that stuff means, right? It's so like Christianity and faith can be so challenging if you want to make it that way. But Tony Robbins says this. He says that complexity is the enemy of execution. So simplicity is key. So when I start, just like you said, for a fitness side, go for a walk. Like just put your shoes on and step outside for some people, right? For spirituality, I say just read a proverb a day. And then once you got that down, then learn to just pray, even if you don't know how to pray. God, it could be so raw and vulnerable. Lord, I don't even know how to pray, but this is me coming to you, knowing that you have some sort of role and influence in my life. And I just pray that you would teach me more about that. And then all of a sudden, watch what happened, bro. This is what God does is so unreal. Is all of a sudden he starts to bring people into your life. And he starts to bring opportunities. And it's all because you open the door. You open the door. You don't got to know it all. You don't got to even know what to do. You just open the door and let him in, and he'll start bringing people. He'll start bringing conversations. He'll introduce you to a church. He'll introduce you to this. And all of a sudden, 6 months, a year later, you're like, holy smokes. Like, I'm not even the same person anymore. And now I have this, just like you said, Jason, this relationship. I don't have religion, but I have relationship with God, which is completely different. Most people are scared of faith because of religion. They've had church hurt. They're afraid of I don't want to be judged. The church is just full of judgmental people, all this bullshit. None of it matters. All that God wants is a relationship with you, for you to trust him, for you to know that it's not you that has to carry all the burdens, that he can help you, that he loves you regardless of who you are and what you do, right? And that's the difference. But it all starts with something so small. And then you add in that prayer. If you do a daily prayer, I started learning that I would read a proverb and then I would pray through the proverb. So like if I went to Proverbs 10, Proverbs 22, and it said something about, whatever the line might be, I would be like, God, can you show me this? I'd read the proverb, the sentence, and then I'd say, God, could you show me how to do this? And then I'm just in active prayer. And all of a sudden God is teaching you how to be a better man through the whole process. It's incredible.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that.
I have on Audible the Holy Bible, the King James version, and so on Audible it's nice because I could listen to that in the sauna or whatever it is. I'm currently in the Book of John, and I started with the Book of John, so I'm not very far in. But the Proverbs is a good idea. I appreciate you sharing that, man. That's a great that was a great question, Gabe. Thanks for asking that, because I do think that it can be overwhelming at times, for sure.
Really quickly, I want to teach you this and your listeners. That's the quickest way to understand. So there's reading the Bible, which is like just reading a book and trying to comprehend it, which it's really hard to comprehend. But there's 4 questions you should ask yourself when you read the Bible. Read one chapter and then ask yourself these 4 questions, and you can reflect back on these. What does it say about God? What does it say about people? What is God saying to me? What am I going to do about it? Okay. That last statement is a statement of repentance. It means that God has told me something through this passage. You can read any scripture, any chapter in the Bible. Ask yourself, what does it say about God? What does it say about people? What is God saying to me specifically? And what am I going to do about it? And that allows God to speak to you through scripture. That will allow you to extract. Maybe I need to be a better husband, and I need to take my wife on a date night this week, right? Maybe it's I've been really hard on my kids, and I need to put something in place to where I de-stress before I come home. But God will speak to you through scripture if you allow him. You just got to ask the right questions.
Well, Nathan, I really appreciate you being on the show, especially for this, Men's Mental Health Awareness Month of June, the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign that we're running, or that we're doing. We're going to be having patches. We have patches made that basically it's like a train hard shoulder to shoulder, and all the proceeds are going to Movember, which is Movember. So that's something we're doing, and we're trying to do more of it. We're trying to support more men in a variety of ways, but conversations like this, I think, is probably the most impactful thing we could do, alongside obviously our newsletters and whatnot. But I just want to say thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. I'll be heading out to Texas. I'll message you because I'm doing a Border Patrol or customs event right in your neck of the woods. So hopefully we'll be able to connect. And you and Gabe got to get together, man. You're right. You're right down the road from him.
Yeah, I didn't know you were in San Antonio. I'm in.
Are you in Austin? Oh, Seguin. Oh, shoot. Yeah, you're right.
Literally. Yeah, right down.
Oh, absolutely.
Right down 10,
we got to get together, man.
Yeah.
Well, Nathan, on that side, what's the best place if guys have been listening to you for a while, they're like, dude, this guy, I want to learn more. What's the best place to go? Would it be social? Would it be your website? Where is the best place to go?
It's Instagram at Nathan Mansfield. And then I have a link in bio if you're interested in finding out more about how our coaching or one of our free master classes. We're going to start running master classes for men every single week that are absolutely free. So just giving a lot of tools on how to build the architecture of your life. And maybe if you're feeling stuck, how to get out of that. So my social has everything at Nathan Mansfield. You can just follow me there, look at my link in bio, watch my content. It's all free. So
love it. We'll make sure to put that in the podcast show notes. Well, on behalf of myself, Nathan, Gabe, we really appreciate you guys listening. Make sure to go check out the other episodes that are dropping in June for Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, and all the previous guests and solo episodes that Gabe and I do. We put a lot of time and energy into the podcast. And as per usual, simple ask: if you got value from this episode, share with a friend. That's it. That's the ask. Keep training hard. See you guys next time.